Hello, welcome back to Commonspace's live feed on Facebook. I'm Ben Wray, Commonspace editor. I'm joined now by David Jamieson, Commonspace journalist. So what we're going to do now is just for 10 minutes basically round up our thoughts on the conference. Everyone's getting packed away. The Heathrow lounge is disappearing behind us. It's the end of the conference. We've just heard Nicola Sturgeon's speech, and we're just going to basically round up our thoughts on the speech and on the conference. David, what's your kind of general take on what Sturgeon said?
It's a pretty strong speech as they go. Just evidence, I suppose, that Nicola Sturgeon...
Good timing.
Good timing, yeah. I think that's them emptying the hall.
That's the round of applause. Okay.
She's a strong performer. She's obviously head and shoulders above her opponents in the Scottish Tories and Scottish Labour. The substance of the speech, there was nothing in there that we weren't expecting. Mm-hmm. I don't think there were any major policy announcements. Most of the things that she announced were sort of known anyway up to a certain point. It was interesting that I think she pitched quite hard against Corbynism. Mm-hmm. I think she's eager to absorb an attack from a left flank, saying that she has implemented many of the policies that Jeremy Corbyn only talks about. Mm-hmm. I thought that was quite a clever line. She was defiant in the face of Scottish Labour and Scottish Tory claims that those UK parties would include a manifesto commitment to block another independence referendum and challenge them on their democratic credentials on that. No big reveals. We don't really emerge from the speech with any greater sense of where strategically they're looking to go with a second independence referendum, so anyone listening for that might have been disappointed. She did welcome the demonstration on Saturday, but she tempered that with saying, but we need to be pragmatic and patient. And she urged patience, and that's actually been a line that we've heard from around the conference. Mm-hmm. And another line that we've heard going around in a similar vein is it's as much about why as when. Mm-hmm. So trying to offset demands for, when is this process actually going to happen. So the speech, as with the conference, I don't think we've really emerged with a much stronger sense of when a second independence referendum will be held.
I think it's kind of the elephant in the room conference in some ways. All the big issues haven't really been addressed. They've all been pushed further down the road. Timing of a referendum's not been addressed. We're going to have to wait for a deal. The issues around the case for independence have not been addressed. That's been pushed back to the next conference. Sturgeon referenced the Growth Commission, but she did so in such a way whereby she wasn't committal towards it.
Yeah.
She just said it showed the opportunities of independence, but didn't say I support X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
So all the kind of big debates really have not been addressed. And I guess we've got to reference the domestic agenda, where it was I thought it was quite policy light. Mm-hmm. The speech. With this Fair Work First agenda, what's pushing it through all aspects of government support for business, which is government supported business grants, procurement, stuff like that, which is good, it's fine. Scottish National Infrastructure Company, that could be quite a big thing in terms of ending public-private partnerships. But there was no real big, there was previous conversations announced a national energy company and things like that. There was no real big policy ask. So
I think the way you might look at that is it was policy left but policy light.
Yes.
Most of the stuff that was declared or semi-declared or redeclared was pitching to the left, particularly on economic policy.
Yes.
Made much out of the Amazon thing about Nicola Sturgeon. Of course, she famously confronted Amazon and said, you're not going to be in receipt of business grants. So that was rolled out into a larger approach to large kind of corporate entities in the speech. So yeah, policy light, but with an eye to an understanding that there's a lot of anger in the country over economic policy and the state in the country in terms of wages and benefits and stuff like that. Probably an eye to the Labour conference in that sense.
It was quite interesting that she said the Labour conference was an SNP tribute act, in the sense that Corbyn's stealing the SNP's policies himself. I think the orientation on Corbyn is not Corbyn is a fraud. It's that we're already doing what Corbyn wants to do.
Yeah.
You know, it's a kind of different way of approaching it, which does suggest he takes the challenge of Corbyn seriously in some ways.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think it's plausible for the public anymore to keep hearing that behind the left-wing facade of Corbynism is the same old New Labour practice. That's something that I don't think is terribly plausible after the summer of the anti-Semitism smear. After the sheer amount of energy that's been thrown at the Corbyn project to disrupt it apart from anything else. After the fact that at this UK Labour conference the party shifted left again on economic policy, it becomes untenable to keep arguing that it's all for show. This was quite a clever manoeuvre to say it's not that it's all for show, it's that we're already doing the real deal of Corbynism with the limited powers that we already have in Scotland.
What happens now? So my take from what Mike Russell said to you in an interview, which by the way you can watch that interview on Commonspace.scot, David did with Mike Russell, the Brexit spokesperson. My take was independence referendum's not going to happen before March next year. That's also what we've heard from constitutional experts as well.
Yeah.
He seemed to imply that. Sturgeon said that she'll announce what she's going to do when this phase of the Brexit negotiations are done, which could be November, December. We may not even know really until March. She's talked herself about a blind Brexit. So where does the state of play lie basically on the big questions now? Is it basically all just kicked down the road? Is there any problems with kicking down the road? One problem I see is that they're still not resolved their case for independence. They're still not resolved their currency position and anything like that. The longer you wait to solve that, the more chance you're not going to solve it in time. So what are the challenges?
I think that there's a couple of points here. I mean, we said at the beginning there have been none of the big questions, none of the elephants have been resolved. But if there has been a bit of movement on, for example, the independence referendum timing debate, it has been that we are clearly, the sense you get from leading SNP politicians, and by the way from speaking to delegates at the conference, is that people are no longer looking at a referendum before the Brexit date in March. What Mike Russell did say in that interview was he expects there to be a longer process. Now sometimes you hear this pitched as, so Nicola Sturgeon in a speech for example said that they were desperate to extend the deadline, right? So some people see this as an extended deadline on Brexit in 2019, perhaps into 2020. The way Mike Russell described it is, there'll be a long process almost of sort of disentanglement between the UK and the EU. Perhaps that's part of what Nicola Sturgeon's calling, blind Brexit. So they're anticipating a longer period of time over which a second independence referendum could take place, and that's part of their argument about patience, about arguing the why and not the when, is that the time constraints are not really that pressing on us. I think that elides one or two serious problems, which is that in the middle of that situation, any of those situations, all of which are unprecedented, because this whole Brexit process is unprecedented, Scotland could find itself suddenly outside of the EU. And an independence referendum, if that was going to be pitched to people who were pro-EU in Scotland, you'd then need to pitch them independence on the basis that once we were independent we could reapply for membership, and that's a totally different situation. Raises a lot more issues of itself. And the second point is what you raised about the actual, what does independence look like? And the Growth Commission and stuff like that. It's at least feasible that we could end up outside of the European Union with those issues unresolved. But I mean, they are set to be debated at the next year's conference in spring next year.
We think there's no confirmation of that yet.
There's no confirmation. But as long as those issues are sitting there around big things like currency, that could potentially become a problem in terms of the certainty of vision that's being offered as against It's interesting that Nicola Sturgeon said in a speech, independence is the opposite of Brexit. So she's quite consciously, she wants to disassociate the independence movement from what might be seen as another populist constitutional movement. But that becomes a more difficult argument if as with Brexit, there's lots of things you can't say about what independence will mean.
Yes, yeah. Let's finish up by talking about the independence movement and how the independence movement relates to this speech, because we've just had a demonstration on Saturday, biggest in, most people think the biggest demonstration in history. We don't know the numbers. Some people are saying 100,000, some people are saying less than that. Whatever, it was a huge demonstration. My feeling of the mood on that demonstration, it's always hard to tell these things, but the mood is a kind of, they know that the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon's leadership are going to be the people making decisive decision. They know that there's not an alternative leadership that can, offer a clear alternative to that. But there's kind of a restlessness about it. There's a feeling that, are we waiting too long and missing an opportunity? Where do you think the movement and Sturgeon sit in relation to one another now? My feeling in this conference is they're still behind her. But I don't think she's won anyone over who's feeling like impatient on the independent side from this speech today. Has she?
It's enormously hard to say because, the impression I've got from speaking to delegates here is I have spoken to some who are impatient and say we need to get on with this as soon as possible. I've spoken to plenty of others whose general sentiment is I trust the leadership to make these decisions. I think the interesting thing about the All Under One Banner marches and similar events is that they've created a space, a forum, which is autonomous of the SNP, but which is debating independence, talking about it on the marches, talking about timing, talking about currency, talking about all these sorts of issues. And that's quite a new development for the independence movement, which before then, during of course 2012 to 2014 there was a much broader movement with lots of different organisations. Then for a time, after the sort of 2015 general election, the SNP really consolidated much of the movement and it became the major locus of debate about what Scottish independence meant, what the timing was, what the issues were. Now there's something else. So I think that's the interesting development. It's hard to say exactly where people are at either on the march or here. There is a range of opinions and there is a persistent feeling of discipline and unity inside the independence movement. That's one of the the SNP's, for example, strengths versus parties like Labour and the Conservatives. They still have this enormous degree of loyalty, discipline, and that pervades to an extent in the wider independence movement. So I think that's still there. What will be interesting to see is, does the broader independence movement start convening independent centres of thought and strategy outside of the SNP, and how do they interact with the SNP leadership's ideas about strategy?
So that's all we've got time for today. If you go to commonspace.scot, you can see a range of articles about the SNP conference over the last few days. Please give the video a like and a share if you enjoyed watching it, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks so much.